Proportional Response, Book 1, Chapter 13, Part 2, Mens Riad. Femeacan Ambassador Garland Basco tried to ignore the agitated fidgeting of Wendy Sorsong, the small prey-bird-like Findle ambassador, and pay attention to their human host. The man pointed out the window at the planet, which dominated the rather breathtaking view of space afforded by the largest window he'd ever seen on a space station. The man wore a careful smile and was trying, valiantly, in Galen's opinion, not to react to the screeching, near accusations of the little ambassador as he answered her question. The two of you were invited because you share access to the Vandaren system and raw riches that system holds. The fact that the highest concentration of riches that system are locked away on a planet with gravity even higher than we humans are comfortable with, and unstable magnetic disturbances to boot, has complicated matters for you. Well, we, at this research station which we placed in an uninhabited system in order to perform research that might otherwise be considered a risk to civilians, have developed a solution. Well, to be fair, the solution itself is not new, and we know that your governments have been debating on methods of implementing one form or other of the solution, and I guess what you could say is that we have come up with a new form of the solution, one which costs slightly less than the others and results in less waste. The human had begun to look away from them, appearing to stare at something far in the distance. He finally shook himself and brought his attention fully back to the present. Engineer Galen thought to himself, I guess some things are fairly constant across species. The man continued speaking. You will find a full geological workup of the planet you see down there on the pads we gave you when we arrived. It does not have the rich potential for exploitation that your problem world does, but shares the characteristics that matter for the purposes of this method. Galen nodded slightly. What characteristics would those be? Molten core, large magma layer, relatively thin surface crust with low tectonic activity, magnetic instability caused by abnormal magma flow. The difference between your problem child and our boy out there is that the instability in this world is being caused by different, less valuable elements. Still, any magma core world would do for the technique we have developed. Galen brought his brows down briefly in a frown at the Findle. She now stood rock still, not even her head making the slightest movement. Fight, flight, freeze. And Findle don't have a fight as far as anyone can tell. What has her so terrified? I can guess what the human is getting at, and it is not like every species in the League doesn't have a method of doing this, one way or the other. That the humans have figured out a means of their own so quickly is hardly a surprise. Maybe not expected, but not really surprising. Another human wandered up and handed a pad to their guide. The man took it and nodded, then looked at Galen and winked. Their guide addressed a question to the new human. What is the mass of the planet out there? 6.0, 1 times 10 to the 24 kilograms. What is the mass of the world that we estimate our friends here could use the process on? 5.98 times 10 to the 24 kilograms. Can you list off the principal composition of both planets for me? The other human, who made Galen feel strangely uncomfortable in a way he couldn't understand. Maybe the lack of discernible emotion on the man's face? Listed off a dozen or so elements for each planet, along with estimated percentages and densities. Wendy finally managed to pull herself out of her fear and made an indignant noise. I don't understand the point of you questioning your subordinate over trivia, human. Are we supposed to be impressed that the man can memorize facts that we need our technicians to understand? Their guide nodded and gave what Galen supposed was supposed to be either an apologetic or placating smile. Forgive me. I do like showing Frank here off when I get the chance. He is a remarkable human. He has what we call a photographic memory. He remembers every detail of every fact he is ever exposed to. For example, if he reads a book once, he can sit down and quote the entire thing to you from memory, even years later. The other human gave a partial smile and spoke. I'm afraid he may be overstating the matter a bit. I do forget things on occasion, but people like me comprise approximately 2.984% of the human race, and have memories far better than any other sapient we are aware of. The guide rolled his eyes, looked at the strange human, and spoke. Sometimes forget. Better than anyone. Really? You make it sound like, okay, fine, I'll play. When was the last time that you forgot something? The strange human shuffled back and forth on his feet, then answered, I was asked to recreate Mozart's Fifth Orchestra. I mixed up 3 notes in the 101st stanza of the second violin part, had them totally out of order when we ran the sheet music through the computer. The guide cut him off with a wave of his hand. How long ago exactly did this happen? The answer came spilling out of the strange human's mouth, even though it looked almost like the man didn't want to answer. 3 years, 12 days, 4 hours, 15 minutes and... Wait, you said to never give you the seconds unless you specifically asked for them. Galen felt his eyebrows raise, but Wendy shook her fist at the human. Fraud. Nice piece of acting, but I have learned to read human expressions to some degree, and that human, she gestured to the strange memory man, has all the acting ability of a paper bag. You think to impress me with your little play here? A man can memorize a handful of stats and lines when prompted, and you dragged me across the stars for this. Their guide drew his eyebrows down and turned quickly to face Wendy. Her words died in her throat, and the man spoke. I am an engineer, madam. I don't lie. However, I anticipated that you might not believe me. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, after all. I had him read through both of your public files before you came here. Ask him anything, he can tell you. Wendy's head whipped back and forth to look at the guide with first one eye, and then the other, in that peculiar way of an agitated Findle. At length she turned to the strange human. Tell me, what were my grades in my 4th semester of university? Physics, R-, History G+, Ethics of Submission G+, Interpersonal Communication Facilitation G+. You also officially audited Comparative Sapient Anatomy and a class on your world's native fauna. Wendy cut the man off. I suppose you can tell me the name of my 3rd grade teacher as well, Mr. Renkoff. He had been a teacher for 23 years at that point. In the essay you wrote for acceptance to university, you mention him in the 34th and 43rd sentences as... Wendy cut him off again. Fine, I will grant, provisionally, that I may believe your claims. Either his memory is what you claim, you have done an excellent job of choosing what to memorize based on my psych profile, or you have cracked cybernetics. I am not sure which possibility I find more disturbing. Is that your purpose here today? Human? To inspire fear in the ambassador of another species? Their guide held up a placating hand. I'm sorry if I have offended, Ambassador. I just get excited when we get visitors, and like to let my friend here show off a little. I am proud to have him after all. Nearly everyone else who has his abilities lives on one human planet or another, working comfortably on a generous government stipend on the Great Memorization Project. Someone, somewhere, decided that we are too reliant on technology to retain all of our information, so people like my friend here spend their days reading, memorizing, any and all information that humans possess. That way, if something catastrophic were to happen, we'd have people who could rebuild our knowledge and culture. Galen's eyebrows shot up. Wait, you are telling me that roughly 3% of your population is paid to spend their days sitting and reading? How do you define generously? Their guide smiled. My wife is the director of this facility, and they each get paid more than her and I combined. The man's wrist communicator beeped, and he turned to face the large window. The time's come. Keep your eyes on the planet, folks. Galen noticed an abrupt change in the tenor of the room. When they entered the large room, a number of the humans had been standing or walking about, and there had been the sort of low-key buzz of conversations floating around that he'd expect of a room with so many people. Now that buzz had vanished, and only one human seemed to speak at a time, and only when spoken to by the woman with the yellow hair who seemed to be at the center of it all. Most of the humans now sat with eyes intent on their consoles, though any who didn't stared just as intently out the huge window. The central woman sat, back ramrod straight, her head pointed squarely at the window. Even without seeing her face, he could practically feel the intensity coming off of her. She spoke again, with tones of authority and anticipation. Navigation? Someone responded. On course, speed at 16C. We are at -45 seconds and counting. She nodded. Good. Ops, kill internal lighting. Navigation, start the countdown at 30. The lights which had flooded the oversized room went out and all of the consoles dimmed considerably. He noticed a few humans turn the brightness of their displays up a little, but not much. Even the dimmest of those consoles is still rather bright, but I suppose that the humans don't hunt at night as much as we do. A countdown began, starting at 30 seconds. The woman in the center continued to call out to her subordinates. Each answered promptly. When the countdown got to 10, everyone stopped talking, and they waited. The air seemed to grow thick with anticipation. 2, 1, impact. A strange, slightly curved beam of light flashed in space. Galen couldn't tell if it had come from the planet or connected to it. Wait, curved beam of light? No, that wasn't light. That was a ship moving at FTL speeds. Why would you crash a ship into a planet? Wait, mining. They wouldn't. The wall-sized window shifted, becoming a huge display instead of a window, which zoomed in on the portion of the planet which was hit. An impact crater could be seen, with glowing magma at the bottom. It had to be huge, but he couldn't get a good sense of scale. There was a moment of applause from the humans in the room, then chaos seemed to descend. The humans at the consoles began to call out numbers, often preceded by words his translator simply dismissed as technical jargon. Their guide turned back to them as the image on the screen showed fissures forming in the crust of the planet around the impact crater. We estimate it will take 60 to 80 hours for the planet to fracture completely, then another couple hundred hours for all of the magma to cool and the vectors for all the fragments to stabilize. After that, conventional space mining techniques can be used to... Wendy began to scream. I know what you are trying to do, humans. You can't scare me. We, the Feindel, may not be fighters, but we are protected by the might of the Exalted Republic, and this attempt at intimidation will not go unanswered. Ugh. All activity had stopped, and every human had turned to stare at the Feindel ambassador. Some of them looked quite angry, particularly the woman in charge of the whole thing. She had bolted out of her chair when Wendy started yelling, and now advanced toward them at a slow pace, with her head slightly down. Galen had to fight an urge to take a step back as the woman walked towards them, hands slightly out from her sides. The effect on the Feindel, however, was visible and immediate. Wendy's words cut off with a strangled cry, and she began to tremble so that he feared she might lose her feathers. The human woman stopped well out of reach, possibly because she saw the Feindel seem to be on the edge of fainting. She spoke quietly, but with tones that could carry steel. This advance is a mining tool, Ambassador. One not unlike certain tools developed by your own species. I find it disturbing that you think we would use it for anything else. Each one is basically a pre-programmed FTL ship with extremely powerful shields and a very powerful computer designed to make sure it hits the planet at just the right spot. It is far too expensive to use for a weapon, even before talking about what the old machines would do to any race which tried to use world-busting weapons. Humanity has no desire to find ourselves subject to the old machines, ultimate sanction with our populations locked onto our various worlds, and all of our technology reduced to ash. Oh, you didn't know about the technology part, did you? You see, we have actually gone into the archives and pulled the research on the ultimate sanction. The old machines don't just put your race behind shields, they render all of your race's technology to dust. Computers, buildings, books, roads, even dams and bridges. The only thing they leave is whatever clothes your people are wearing at the moment they enact the sanction. No, Ambassador, we don't want that. The only way we would even consider using something so expensive, in terms of cost and consequence, as a weapon, was if we were facing total annihilation anyway, and decided that we would not go gently into that still night. So, Ambassador, I apologize for taking my ambassador's advice and inviting you to this demonstration, thinking that your kind could see the potential for this technology, rather than whatever paranoid delusions your constantly fear-addled little brain has fed you. Now, kindly get off my station while my husband here negotiates with the good ambassador from the Fearadhach. With that, the woman spun on the ball of 1 foot and went back to her chair, calling out to the humans at their consoles for data. Galen watched as Wendy continued to tremble in fear, then look at him accusingly with one eye, then the other, then ran out of the room and down the corridor. He turned to their human guide.
What was that all about?
The human then turned to him and invited him to another room for the preliminary negotiations. The humans have an interesting legal construct they call mens rea, which, loosely translated, means guilty mind. The concept is that for a person to have violated a mens rea law, they would have to have reasonably known that what they were doing was against the law. The counterpoint to this in their legal structures is called strict liability, best summed up as ignorance of the law is no excuse. It is interesting that one of the metrics that their confederation watches for as a sign of corruption in its member nations is the ratio between mens rea and strict liability laws. From the memoirs of High Duchess Euro Feldering.